Hey, welcome back to our exciting podcast and channel. For those of you who are new, please hit the subscribe button for more of this episode to come. Today we're on episode 81, and I'll have Chris tell you about it.
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about the book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. It's a counterintuitive approach to living a good life by the author, Mark Manson. It's like I don't know, have you guys read this book?
I was intrigued, but I guess somewhere along the way, I said, well, probably not something I want to read.
Fair enough. I'll give a quick synopsis of the book. I mean, it's a self-help guide to well, actually, you know what? I'll talk about it in the reflection because I described the book a little bit at the beginning of this. So I'll just go ahead and turn it over, but get fired up here and share my screen so we can get to talking about it. But the reflection title is With Culture. This is what this book made me think about. With culture, you either choose it or it'll choose you. So first off, the person that recommended this book, I don't know if you guys remember, was Snow. I wish he was here today. He be able to talk about this one. He was the one that initially had recommended checking out this book. So, I value Snow's input, and he said he really enjoyed it. So I thought I'd give it a go. I was actually pretty apprehensive to begin with, to be honest with you. This just didn't really seem like it was up my alley. I'm not big into self-help kind of books, I guess, whatever quote unquote want to call a self-help kind of book. So I thought, I don't know. I went into this one a little bit guarded.
I think just because there's so many flavors of self-help guru out there and proclaim experts, and that's the reason why I kind of along the way I said, well, maybe not my cup of tea. I don't know. I'm not totally close to it. Right. I'm still open as long as I get new information, new data points. I might reconsider it.
I'm the same way. I'm open to anything. Like we always talk about, we don't know anything anyway. So I'm always open to learning what other people have to say. But I will say this, I was pleasantly surprised by the author's book. I thought it was entertaining, and I got to give him credit. He made his title alone makes it so mainstream that it's something that I feel like it's approachable for anybody out there. The funny thing that I found was this whole book was actually about basically understanding what matters most in your life, i.e. your values, and then making sure that you build your life around doing what you care about. And that's the subtle art of not giving a fuck, right? Like it's, I don't care. Blake, as you were just talking about right before this, nobody will have any context, but around a work problem, do you really care what other people's problems are? No, if you're focused on doing what you care about and living the life that you want to live, then, that's the subtle art of not giving a fuck, basically in a nutshell. It's not that you don't care, and it's not that you don't want to help somebody else. It's just, when you're really locked in and focused on what you really care about most, you might come across as somebody that doesn't give a shit about other people, but that's not true. You're just so focused and locked in on living the life that you want to live that it just kind of absorbs you. I got to give him credit because the boring words of values, mission, and purpose don't sound as cool as not giving a fuck. So I got to give him a little bit of credit there. That said, though, this book made me think about if you truly are living the way that you say that you want to live, no matter what, you are going to be living the way that somebody says that you should live, whether you choose it or whether you don't choose it. That's up to you at this point in time. And that's where the whole culture is so powerful. Culture is just such an amazing human creation in general. It is based off of somebody was subtle art of not giving a fuck, built some culture around an idea of living that life and living that value and growing that value system in general. Unfortunately, for a lot of people, they don't even realize what's going on around them in terms of the culture that's being built and the lives that they're living, and that they're living somebody else's subtle art of not giving a fuck a lot of times, So you're either doing it yourself or you're doing it for somebody else. And this book made me think about all the things that we're trying to do here, trying to build our own culture around very similar values, around meaningful work and meaningful relationships, and helping people to discover that and connect with that, and to be able to bring their art out into the world and give them a community to support them. So yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things. You have a choice, somebody's subtle art of not giving a fuck. You are living that life right now. If I have the choice, I'm definitely want to choose my own, and build my own culture. But either way, it either chooses you or you're going to choose it. So that's up to you. So I'd love to get your guys' thoughts.
I think it was interesting how you talked about people not being aware of the culture. I think they usually think culture, that's either workplace culture or sports teams culture, or
right.
Don't realize there's a culture, the people that they're hanging around consistently every day, they have their cultures around them and how it's shaping them, and they're not even really aware or assess kind of what that is. I think that's interesting and something probably everybody needs to take a look at.
Honestly, you don't just belong to one culture. You belong to multitudes of cultures, like you said, your sport team affiliates, your places that you work, the the nation state that you live in, the religions that you practice. I mean, you name it. If you belong to some clubs, if you're a tennis player, if you're a pickleball player, whatever those things are, those are cultures that are built around all those activities. So if you are just flying by the seat of your pants, you're going to get wrapped up in some stuff that you don't want to get wrapped up into, or maybe you do. But either way, somebody is guiding that ship for you. Personally, be me.
True.
To me, culture it's in my head, it's like a circle of influence. And so everybody has their own circle. And because culture and circle of influence, it's invisible. So sometimes harder for us to choose. So for me, in my head, I'm saying, okay, if you think about culture, it's like a house, a racket club, or a stadium, or whatever. So you can choose. Say, I choose that house. That house looks pretty, or it looks modern. I like modern, or I like the classical. I like the rustic, whatever. Because you can choose it, but because culture is invisible to our human eyes, we don't really think about choosing it. So we walk randomly into this culture or circle of influence. And what happens is when you go into that circle, for example, you go into the football game you behave just like the fans there because they are the circle of influence, i.e. the culture. And right. So the reflection title with culture, right? You either choose it or it will choose you because you randomly walk into this culture, you will be absorbed in the behaviors and the way the people think. Like you become, let's say the Houston Texans is very, fanatic about being very loud or whatever, then you will become loud and obnoxious just like that, just because you happen to walk into that. But if you can see it some capacity, you can choose, hey, I don't like that kind of style, I don't like this. So with culture, you belong to a myriad of different circles, but at the same time, you can choose the similarity between the circles, right? You belong to people who play tennis, for example, and those who play tennis also may be very family oriented or whatever the case may be. They still kind of like a mesh of the different culture that creates another unique culture. And so if you think about it, you can say, well, if I have these number of culture that represents me as Chris, True, or Blake, and if you have a culture where you go in and you say, well, I hate whatever. If you bring in that culture, it doesn't fit. You know what I mean? It kind of conflict with what? But the problem is we don't actually see the culture as we see the houses or places or the kind of things that is visible to the eye. So it's harder for us to judge until we become, I guess, cognizant and aware of what culture is and what culture represent. And I think the book, the sort of art of not giving a fuck kind of, it's another way of saying the culture and values, which a lot of these gurus and market experts are bastardize these terms so that people becomes like very jaded with that word. But essentially, I think the book, it's saying the same thing, but in a new way. And because it's so new that people pay attention and it makes it, relatable because, it's not something that is being, bastardized to death with, So for me, I think if we can objectify the culture, it's a little bit easy to understand. Do you agree?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is about alignment. When you don't give a fuck, well,
the thing is, when you don't give a fuck,
you give a lot of fucks about what you give a fuck about.
No, but it's saying, hey, if I'm focusing on my values, everything else is not what I am or what represents me. It becomes noise. And when it becomes noise, I can't care for all the values. I don't care for the top 5 to 10 values that it is important to me. There are hundreds and thousands of the values. I mean, I just can't care for every value. So besides the 5 or 10 that I care about, the rest is ignorable, i.e. not giving a fuck.
Yeah, exactly. It's like tunnel vision, right?
You focus on the more you focus on, the more noises you would filter out.
Right, exactly.
And whatever is not within your top 5 or top 10, well, it doesn't affect you that much because, okay, this guy is this value. Well, it doesn't matter to me. He do what he needs to do. I mean, for me, if you don't align with the value that I hold, then, it's not inside of my circle of influence. So I don't really give a fuck. I don't really care. As long as if that value comes into your circle, then you will care. I guarantee you will care. Whether that you want to push them out or what you want to help them, or you want to, whatever you want to do. It's as long as the inside of your circle of influence, that's 5 to 10 values that happens to intersect, then you would care. But beyond that, it's basically a blur.
Like if the hustle and grind culture entered my life, I would say,
yeah,
you need to either become balanced, the focus on what
you
we're
need to take a look at yourself,
or get the fuck out. Like,
hey, I need to change you. I need to kick you out of my circle. So I don't want to interact with you because you're just toxic to me.
Right, exactly. Like I think of, and I don't know these people personally, so I mean, I may be totally wrong, but like I think of like a Grant Cardone, I think is that his name, Cardone or whatever, or like a Gary Vaynerchuk, or like those two guys. I don't know how I would ever overlap with them, or what we're trying to build within the club, and whatever overlap with like those guys. Now it might be great to go and leverage their social media following or their whatever, but like it doesn't align. And like I don't give a fuck about them. Like, I mean, they can say whatever they want to say all day every day in the ecosystem. People could say they're the best thing since sliced bread.
Right. And it's the same thing for us too.
I'm not gonna align.
I mean, people doesn't align with us. I mean, we're not gonna change anyone who isn't aligned with us. And there is gonna be more. There's a lot of people who they think that balance is the way. They say, I need to hustle and bustle. I need to rise and grind. I need to grind until I die. And that's the culture, and that's what they want. They is not going to relate to what we're saying. People say, you have only one life. Do drugs, smoke, get weed, drink. What's life for? What's the point of living? And that's the outlook. And for my outlook is, I like to live a healthy life. My opinion is, it's not my fault your life sucks, that you don't want to live that long.
Right.
That's my opinion. If people who agree with me, then come be in my circle. If not, then it's fine. Because you can't change people's perspective. And then they don't know what they don't know. But my thinking is that people don't know. But the problem with them not knowing is they refuse to take considerations, another look from the other person's perspective before they decide. They just automatically say, why live a balanced life? I need to hustle and bustle until I die, because what's the point of living a life? I need to enjoy or whatever.
Yep.
Right? Yeah. So it's not the point that they don't know. The point is they refuse to know.
I 100% agree. And bring this back to the whole culture side of everything. Like, once again, with like Gary Vee or Grant Cardone or whatever, with those guys, you could easily get sucked up into their orbit. That culture will just choose you. If you don't know what you care about and how to subtly not give a fuck about the message they're sending out into the world, it is very easy to find yourself. You see it all the time with people on social media with the whole crypto world or whatever, right? Like, these guys are like, oh man, I made $1 million on crypto or something like that. And you just get sucked into it and you're like, oh, this sounds really cool. Like, this is what you got to do if you want to do this. And these people just start doing it, and then they find themselves down the road, they're like more lost than ever, and they're like, well, I don't know what the hell.
Like winning a lottery.
It doesn't mean you have
there's a lot of people who invest in crypto, but there's a handful of people who are billionaires.
But people then listen to those people that are the billionaires, and they're like, and that culture, they don't choose it. That's the opposite of not the subtle art of
we talk about the book Skin in the Game by Nicholas Taleb. Skin in the Game, he's talk about, people, when they give you the statistics, they only give you the one that actually survived, like the 1%.
Right.
And that's what they use for statistics. Hey, these people, these 30 people, they invested and they became rich. But there's like 3 million people that they just discounted because it's not in this data set that they're going to use. So just like crypto, it's like there's millions of people who invest and the money in it, but only a handful of people get on the news, and they are the one that say, hey, crypto is the one that you need to invest in, without any research or study on their behalf.
Agreed.
I mean, and
either choose it or don't choose you.
And that's kind of reaffirm what you're saying. You either have a purpose, have a culture that you want to intently be focusing and look for, or you randomly get sucked into this circle of influence or the world, and you will become the victims of that particular culture or whatever, because it's not your culture, therefore it doesn't align with you, therefore in the end you become the victims.
Exactly. You can set out to search for any culture you want to search for, and you'll find it. If you want to be a Taliban, you can figure out what that culture is all about. If you want to be a white nationalist, you could probably figure that culture out pretty fast. If you wanted to be somebody that supports abortion rights or whatever. Just a quick Google search and there's an infinite number of cultures that you could go, spend your time on and invest your time into. And
yeah, I mean, you look at she doesn't know how to play poker, but after she went into and researched the poker world, she become, one of the, notable poker player.
Right. But
right?
She chose that, and
exactly. That's the intent. Is once you intend to do something, when you look for something, you know what you're looking for. You're going to be focused on finding whatever it is and embrace that circle. And she goes and she found the circle of the poker world and becomes one of the top players in that world. Like I said, you have to look for it. You can't just stumble upon. But if you stumble upon it, then you're probably gonna be in the bottom half of the food chain.
Absolutely. Well, there's so many poker players out there in the world that have,
a lot of money.
That are, I mean, hell, I'm probably one of them. From when I was a young kid, I didn't choose that culture. It chose me and beat me up. Blake, I know you've had your own experiences around, that kind of stuff as well. And it's one of those things where if I ever wanted to go back to like playing poker, and I knew what values that aligned to, I actually do think I could probably go do that and sustain it today, but I don't want to, just because I know that it damaged me so hard in the beginning. But now, knowing what we're talking about now, if I wanted to go choose that like Maria did or something like that, I feel like I could safely walk into that world and understand what I'm here for, what I want to accomplish, and how I want to behave in this culture. And does it align? Unfortunately, it doesn't, because the highs and lows are so unbalanced, in general for me.
It's all about the values that you hold. If you don't value it, it's not going to align and fit. But if it is, then it doesn't matter. I mean, there's no right or wrong. Is that you? If it is you, then that's fine. Be good at it, whatever you need to do. But it's not you, then, don't focus on things that doesn't matter. First things first.
Blake, do you have any thoughts? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've been just kind of listening and thinking a lot about kind of what you guys have said. And, I think you guys have said that, culture is something you really can't see. But one thing I was kind of, I guess, thinking about is it's interesting with cultures, how they can change and, who influences them. And the word mimicking is something that, really just kind of came to me. I really thought about culture of, you see a culture growing, when you see people start mimicking each other and how they talk or how they behave, that's where culture, something is evolving, happening there. And, when, workplace, somebody starts gossiping, and then before you know it, you got somebody else gossiping to you about something. And, that can be something that you start kind of, these habits and these things, that people kind of start mimicking each other. That's kind of like when some sort of culture is growing. Maybe it's exercising, maybe, whatever it might be. And you see these people kind of, all these people start doing the same thing, mimicking each other. I think that's part of when you see a culture evolving and growing. And then also, I was thinking about people that are identifying who are culture drivers, who are doing something that's different. You're seeing people mimicking them, outside of the norm of the group. And that those people can be good and bad. Do you want to not give an F about a certain culture that doesn't fit yours, or do you want to try to be a culture driver and do something different and see if people start mimicking you and see if you can build a culture? So those are some of the things that were kind of coming to my thoughts and minds as you guys were talking. And
for me, I think the culture it's something that if you have a strong culture. So culture, when you think it evolved, is either evolved from within or from the influx of different culture that mixes and becomes a different culture.
I think a strong culture from within, if something comes outside of that and acts outside of the norm, that is going to be it's either going to be I think I don't know how to describe this, the energy, it's either you need to get on board and start kind of acting towards how we are, or you probably need to work your way out of this, because that's
right. So the thing is, that's what I'm saying, that the strong culture is what holds the culture. Because if you don't have a strong culture, for example, if you have a startup and you have a certain culture and workplace and the way you treat people, and then you start having to raise money, and then they would put in board of directors and hiring people, it blends the current culture with the culture of these outsider. That changes the culture. And a lot of people most startup doesn't retain the culture. But if you have a strong culture, if you have a strong culture, right, it doesn't change, because when somebody comes in, it bounces out. When you take the Texas Aggie, for example, a lot of people hate it because they cannot relate. They cannot blend in. They say these guys are completely nuts. But because I'm in the culture, I hold it like as if, that's my life. But the thing is, anyone that sees what I do as an Aggie, they think that I'm crazy. They won't even get close to me. That the culture of the Aggie, the culture of the Marine, they don't change. You go to the Marine, you will see a big difference in culture. These are the brothers of, for life. They will take care of each other. That's a culture. And that doesn't change because it is so strong that any differences that anyone can bring in going to get rejected and get bounced. So that's important to know what your culture is and how do you, retain that. You got to go through the 7 generations and figure it out if it aligns with the core values and whatnot. If you let culture evolve by itself, then yes, you're going to have a mixture, a blended, and that blended could take whatever it needs, wherever the influx happens to be.
Right. The wind will just go wherever. I mean, you guys talk about startups. I've been involved in many startups, and I know Blake, you have, True, you have, I've seen the culture literally change from one of people that are, as soon as money got injected into the whole scenario, it changed from a mission to making money. That was the culture completely shifted. And the people were like, well, the leadership shifted. When the mission of the culture shifted, the people had to shift as well in order to meet that, and like you find yourself in this weird, you feel lost, like when you feel like you belong to a culture and then all of a sudden you don't, and that could be a really lonely and isolating place. And it sucks. Like, and that's when, you need to get the hell out of there. Right.
Don't get the hell out of there. You get influenced by that culture and your values start to change.
Yep. And then you're just a lost individual floating through the ether. And that sucks. Like, that's not the way that any of us want to live our life.
This is when the culture chooses you.
Exactly.
And I think it's so important that people do that pulse check, regularly. They say, this is our culture, this is our mission statement, there's our core values. But then, how often are you really revisiting those and then assessing how you're acting as a company, and are you aligning with those? And you see sometimes these statements on walls of places and you're like, looks great. I just think it's important that people regularly do that. And that needs to be at the core of whatever you're doing. If you have a business, like, yeah, it's an idea, it's a product, whatever it might be. But I mean, to have it survive, you have to, as you create that, you have to have those if you want it to survive. And you have to stay true to those. You have to do pulse checks on that. I think that's what makes companies really take off and turn into something. I also was wondering, do you think there are a lot of kind of floating cultures out there on certain topics, different spaces of society, I guess, or groups where it's kind of like there's large groups of people that are just kind of constantly evolving and nothing really has control? Do you guys see any of those out there that you think like it's a group of people that kind of have maybe a belief, but it's just something that's kind of always evolving and just kind of moving with,
like majority of society is the floating culture. I mean, the way we believe in different things without any kind of understanding and study on to whether that there is really factual evidence that supports it or not. Whether that's, saturated fats is good for you or it's not good for you. Coconut oil was bad, now it's good. I mean, why do we believe certain things? It's floating. Avocado was bad, right? You go and you search the internet for avocado, it's good for you now.
I heard a quote recently. It was consistency over intensity, right? Like what True was talking about, like sparked that thought of like, I think of like the Atkins diet, or I think of like paleo diets, or I think of like all these fad diets and things like that, like you could intensely go fast, and like the fasting culture or Wim Hof even, or something like that, like cold immersion. Like, I mean, there's so many things out there that you could go intensely focus in on for a few months of your life or a few years of your life. But like, it really comes down to consistency over intensity. It's knowing who you are and doing that every single day is the subtle art of not giving a fuck and doing that for your entire life. Like, I mean, that is literally what it is. The people that are lost are the ones that, all of a sudden next week they're huge tea people. And then the next week they're like coffee people. And then the next month they are doing whatever. I'm not saying you can't ever add new things to your life or anything like that, but it needs to be controlled. It needs to be understood. It needs to be evaluated, and it needs to be aligned. Otherwise you're just You're one of those floating people that are just floating through life. And that doesn't sound fun to me. I don't want to be that person.
So to me, like a culture and the way you live your life, it's like a painting. If you intently and purposely put the colors in a certain area, in a certain patterns, you have a beautiful picture. What colors do you get when you mix other colors together?
Black?
Brown. Ugly brown. Or saying that, to me,
poop.
The color.
And then the longer you go in life, the less canvas you have too. So it's harder to turn it into a beautiful painting.
Sure.
Right. So you want a beautiful painting.
That's a good one.
You need to purposely place the colors in the proper place. And to me, that's like the art of arranging your life. For example, diets, each one has their own pros and cons. Imagine you mix all the diets together. It's going to wreck your health because that's just like painting. Well, imagine you put all the colors together and just swirl them together. It becomes just one dark, ugly, brownish color. How can you paint a nice picture for your life? Means that you need to intently, purposely put the colors in the proper place that you want it, not by just throwing random things together.
It goes back to what Chris was saying about the consistency thing. I mean, I feel like I've done these bad diets where I go in intense and, and then I do something different and, I do it really hard, really well for a couple of weeks. And, I think that, I think it's figuring out what you want to draw. It's figuring out what you want to do. And then it's doing it. And it's having that's what's there. That's what's is your.
I mean, randomly, there's no one can paint a pretty picture. Even the picture is like all these blots of colors and whatever. Even that is design.
I agree. Design your life, right? Like that's the subtle art of not giving a fuck. Other people are going to see your painting and you're going to go like, well, what about all this? You could do this, you could do that. And you're like, that's okay. This is my painting. I'm doing what I want to do. Like, chill out.
What you want to do, and that's what you should do. And you should find it beautiful. And that's what should matter to you.
Exactly. And the sad part about it is like,
everybody has a pile of brown poop.
Blake, you were saying like,
well, everyone if you let the randomness take over your life, 99.99% of the time, you end up with a pile of poop. You have to purposely design and choose your path. If you don't, it basically makes other colors together.
I love this analogy. And actually, I really like, Blake, your analogy of the older that you get, the less canvas you have to work with to change it. Because like, it makes me think about when I was young, and we've talked about this a million times, between True and I, of like, what would you tell yourself when you were young? Like, this is what I would tell myself when I was younger, is to be intentional with what you're doing, in general. I don't care what it is that you're doing, but be intentional with it. And we just don't do that. We don't teach our kids. I wasn't taught this stuff. I would venture to say that 99% of us are just taught, I don't know what we're taught. We're taught all different kinds of things, and it's up to us to try to figure out
what the current trend is.
Right.
Whatever the trend is, like, for example, the trend in the 70s and continuing to today is study hard, get a good job, get married, buy a house, raise your kids, but that world has changed, but it hasn't. So now with the millennials, like, they have a different set of teachings because it's changing. Oh, now you need to be this and that and other. So it's completely different, but whatever that current societal doctrine or dogma, that's what you get taught.
I don't even know if you get taught it. You don't choose it. It just chooses you. And then,
right.
And then find
basically,
yourself when you're 30 and you're like, what the hell's going on?
It gets passed from one person to the next person, the older to the young, and then, so forth and so on.
No one ever talks to you about learning how to just be aware that these things are happening when you're young. Right. It's going on around you until all of a sudden you're like, whoa, I didn't realize I was a painter until I was halfway through a painting. You got to understand the actions that you're doing, the things that you say, all these different things. You got to understand that. No one taught me that idea. You're creating your painting right now.
Right. And the ideas, whatever, is passed on. So if, for example, if we start a company, right, and we hold these values, we will start teaching those values.
Right. Well, we are teaching it. We're doing it right.
It's not about no one teaches it. It's just because society is, it's being shaped by the randomness of, whatever influences is around them. And that meshes into this unique mixture of whatever it is. And that's continued to get absorbed by the new younger generations until you purposely moved out of that and start to paint. And then once you have that culture, the people who go into your circle of influence will absorb that culture. So we start teaching people how to be, be aware of yourself, learn about who you are, what makes you feel joy, think about things that is important to you. So those are the kind of things that we as a culture hold. Therefore, anyone get into our circle of influence, they will absorb the culture that we live by, because we basically become the example of what we preach.
Exactly. And we have to perform the actions that relate to that. I mean, we have to live that life. We have to walk that walk, like otherwise it's just bullshit, and like, I mean, Blake, you say this regularly when you come to these, things, you feel better after you do this stuff. I feel better when we talk about the things we're trying to do, when we help, through people through the quest, when we are strategizing around how to do other new projects and things that we can help bring this to life. We just feel better, right? And if you feel better and it's aligning, like, you want to go do more of that. That's what we're here to do. I think we kind of beat this topic to a dead horse, I guess, at this point in time.
How many listeners are still there?
Yeah, I think we need to keep short. We need to start shortening these to like 20 minutes or so, just for attention span. Oh, I don't know. We don't need to do anything.
To me, this is something that, like I said, a lot of people will hate this, will think it's the weirdest and stupidest thing and can't stand 1 second of it. And there's people who say, well, I like what he said, right? And I don't care if you don't like it.
True.
Don't watch.
That's true. We don't give a fuck.
I don't care if it's too long. Stop watching.
Hey, fair enough. We're on the Joe Rogan show.
That's a good point. Joe Rogan
I'll stop when we run out of things to say.
Yeah, that's fair.
But I don't give an F about how long something is.
So I think
I will have a lot of haters, and that's fine. I don't care. I will have a lot of supporters, which is fine, because I only want supporters. Because the thing is, I can't expect people to align with what I do and what I say and how I behave. And there's nothing wrong with that. They hold different values. That's fine. I respect that. I don't expect them to have the same values that I do.
Agreed. So let's wrap this one up here with the question that I just realized. The question that people listening to this can ponder is, do the cultures you belong to own you, or do you own them? So something to think about, something to ponder, and keep painting that beautiful picture. And we'll see you all tomorrow.
Right. Bye.